Welcome back. The Competition Bureau just released a report making recommendations it believes will improve competitiveness in Canada's airline industry. For more on that, we're joined by John Gradek, lecturer and coordinator of Aviation Management at McGill University. John, thanks a lot for joining us. Summarize what the Competition Bureau is saying.
Well, I think they're saying that there is a concentration of market power in Canada between Air Canada and WestJet, and that is stifling competition. That really there is too much market power, over 50% up to 75% of the market is in fact controlled by Air Canada and WestJet. There is potential for some concentration of power in allocating airport infrastructure that would preempt other carriers from being able to get into infrastructure based on airports that are fairly busy today. And I'm assuming, they didn't mention it, but I'm assuming Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, maybe Vancouver, maybe. So they really haven't done anything in terms of identifying anything that is earth-shatteringly new. I think the recommendations they're making, are interesting, but I'm not sure whether the Canadian government or the Canadian population really does have the appetite for those recommendations.
Do you agree that there's inadequate competition in the sector?
Yes, I do. I think that if you look at city pairs such as, Toronto, Calgary, or Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton, there's lots of competition. Air Canada is there, WestJet's there, Porter's there, Flair's there. So there's no lack of competition, no lack of pricing behavior that reflects that competition. The problem is the rest of Canada really doesn't have that level of price competitiveness nor presence competitiveness. Air Canada's strength is Toronto and Montreal. WestJet is Calgary. But if you happen to live up in Prince George, British Columbia, or North Bay, or Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, you're watching on the sidelines when it comes to pricing behavior.
So the recommendation appears to be allow foreign investors to step in. And do you think foreign investors will be interested in serving those smaller markets?
Good question. There has to be some value. There has to be some return on their investment to those markets. The first thing they want to talk about, the Competition Bureau is looking to put cabotage, which is a trade name for allowing foreign carriers to operate on domestic routes in Canada. That's been talked about for years. And I think that, the application of those types of rules would in fact attract foreign carriers to Canada. But again, they'll be on those routes where they can make the most money. And that will be, again, on the city pairs that we know that have already significant Canadian carrier presence. So, is North Bay going to be looking for Singapore Airlines, or would Stephenville, Newfoundland be looking to see, British Airways fly in there? I doubt it.
What's the history of this surely is that our airline sector was seen as being nationally important. We didn't want foreign investors controlling our airlines because they might make decisions that were adverse to the interest of the traveling public. What about those concerns? Are they a thing of the past now?
Well, I think that the Competition Bureau is saying that there is a need for capital to be invested in the aviation industry in Canada, and that that capital, and in their opinion, seems to be international capital, or non-Canadian capital. And I think that they've jumped to that assumption fairly quickly. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. I think we do have enough Canadian capital to in fact help Canadian airlines survive. The issue is the return on investment that you're going to get by investing in a Canadian airline, whether you're a foreign investor or a Canadian investor. There is a need to somehow, some way, manage the return that you're going to get, because price competition, market competition does not necessarily lead to higher returns. So there is going to have to be some measurable oversight or governance in terms of who gets to fly what, where, and how much should they be able to charge.
It sounds like these recommendations, if they were enacted, would lead to more competition in the in the routes that you began by telling us already have a fair amount of competition. They would perhaps result in a U.S. air carrier being able to fly from Toronto to Vancouver or from Calgary to Montreal, and that would push prices down in those flights. The smaller markets are a more difficult problem. Is that a fair summary?
That's fair. I think that, the question you would have to, any U.S. carrier or from any country would not see Canada as a really an integral strategic part of their route network. They would, in the business we call it tag-ins, and these would be tag-in flights that would basically allow the carrier to have some market share, but there's really nothing in their strategic intent to really make money on these routes. So they're throwaway pricing, could be. It could be just service levels where they start in June and leave in September. And that doesn't do anything for the Canadian market. I think that, we need, year-round services. We need reasonable services. We need guarantees that these services will stay in place so that Canadians can, in fact, ensure access to air services year-round. So I think that, the Competition Bureau is being very opportunistic in looking at, some peak demands that could attract international carriers. But to my opinion, that's not the answer.
Okay, we have less than 1 minute left. Do you expect pushback from the two incumbents, WestJet and Air Canada? Air Canada in particular is publicly traded, so it often makes public statements.
Yeah, I think that you'll get some pushback. There's some stuff in there that I think Air Canada would really appreciate. The fact that, they really haven't investigated and haven't gone through the impact of, the Air Canada's frequent flyer program on market share and on market presence. It is a significant impact. But I think that there's stuff in there that would scare Air Canada and WestJet. Things like that cabotage project would in fact be very significant, impacting Air Canada.